The next thing I need to do is cut these to length. I had the pattern traced onto my jig, so I knew where the parts were going to end up. And so as I did that, I marked on the part where the end is. Otherwise, it's a little uncertain because these are all slightly different in length, things like that. So what I'm going to do, I've got my template again. I've got that up against here. I've got a zero clearance backer here. And I know that at the top of the leg, the top cut is perpendicular to the front of the leg. So I can just line that up there and make a cut. And then I'll do something, once that's cut, I'll do something similar at the other end. I'll find the correct angle by, supporting this in the correct position and put a stop. Since I now know where the top is, I can use a stop to hold it in place and then cut these all to the same length. The only little bit of a challenge here is this mark is on the front side. So I'll have to kind of peek around the back here to see my mark, but I should be able to make that cut without any problem. I'm set up now to make the second cut. So I've got my template here, I've got my zero clearance, I've got my angle that lines up with that angle, I've got a stop, and notice I've got a piece of wood here because I don't really want to trust the corner as a stop, although in this case it should work. But that should give me all the parts the same length. That'll just fit there like that. Make my cut. Now that the legs are shaped, I can taper them. Now, they've already been tapered because I'm redoing what I did because I forgot to put my microphone on. So imagine they're not tapered. So what I did is I've drawn on the inside of the legs. And I've marked the legs now, so I know which is the bottom and which is the left and which is the right, because up until now it doesn't really matter. But the inside of the legs are tapered, top and bottom. So this is the leg like this, and at the top, the inside's tapered. At the bottom, the inside's tapered. So I've marked the legs. I know which is which. I've marked on the, in this case, the back of the legs. I've drawn lines on here. And I've gone to the bandsaw and cut that material off. Now, as I'm at the bandsaw, it works best if this front surface of the leg is down. So, I've made these cuts. And because this front surface is down, that means this cut surface is perpendicular to this surface. Not necessarily perpendicular to the back of the leg because this is tapered. So I've got, in a sense, a compound angle here. So I'm going to put them on my bench here, and I'm going to now hand plane this bandsaw surface down to my line. And if I put these together like this, you can see that's how it's going to look, of course, spread apart when I'm done. Now, I should also note that my legs are a little bit shorter than my plan because I goofed when I was cutting the ends. I got which end was which mixed up and had to make extra cuts. And so anyway, so the legs are a quarter inch shorter than my plan. Not a big deal. I'm going to use my number 5 here to plane these, and I've got 2 of them. So this one's set a little finer than this one. So because this is a bandsaw surface, it's pretty rough, I've got a relatively coarse cut here. So I'll continue doing this down to my line, which is on this side. And once I'm really close, I'll finish with this other plane. I've got the legs planed now, and I wanted to show something here. As I'm planing these surfaces, I'm watching the interface between the unplaned area and the planed area, because that lets me know if I'm keeping this surface perpendicular to this surface, which is my reference. Remember, when I cut these on the bandsaw, this surface was down. And because this is, a pretty slight taper, anything out of square in this direction will show up out of square here, and this angle is very exaggerated relative to this perpendicularity. So as I'm planing, I'm watching to make sure that this is perpendicular to this face. And similarly on this one, this line, if I hold that flat, should be perpendicular to that plane, which tells me these two faces are perpendicular. So, when I'm doing tapering, that's a good way to tell what's going on. The front legs get tapered, similar to the back legs, in that the bottom of the leg is a 7/8 square. So I've taken one of the legs. Well, first thing, I marked which leg goes where. And then on one of the legs, I have marked where I'm going to be removing material. So the inside of the legs and the back of the front legs get tapered. So the outside of each leg is straight up and down. So I've marked on here where the material gets removed. I've marked on both sides of both parts, so no matter how I put it in my taper jig, I'll see that. But I've only done it for one leg, because once it's set up for one, I should be in good shape for the rest. I've got my taper jig set up, so of course I adjust the angle on this guide piece, tighten it down. This the stock goes up against a stop back here. And one thing I want to make sure is that I cut the correct face first, because of course I'm going to do two sides. So I want to make sure after I make the first cut that the cut side goes up for the second cut. I don't want the cut side going down, because now the leg's at an angle. So I've got that situated. I've got my other leg sitting over here in the same orientation, so I'll make all the first cuts first, and then I'll make the second cuts, because I'll have to readjust this clamp to make those second cuts, because this part's going to be thinner. Next up, I'm going to route the mortises for the tenons. So I'm going to use loose tenons on all of the joints. And I need to mark on both surfaces where the mortise is going to go. So the way I like to do that, say on the front legs, I will lay out one of the joints totally, which means I will show where the part goes, so in this case the top rail and bottom rail on the front. I'll show the outline of the rail, I'll show the outline of the mortise. I'll do the same thing on the mating part, which would be of course, the rail, and make those cuts on my slot mortiser. So you can see I'm hoping this will show up here. I've got everything laid out there. On the rear legs, I have similarly, things are laid out. And on the ends of the rails, I've got things marked. Now on some of these, on the front legs, everything is square. On the back legs, the back legs are angled out 10 degrees. So when I get to that point, I'll walk through how I make those mortises, because some of them are angled, some of them aren't. It'll make more sense when you see how I do that. I'm going to start off simple and do some tiny mortises in the lower front rails. They're just 3/16, and I've got my slot mortiser set up here. Height stops. I've got just a triangle on here. I don't think you can see it, but just to make sure I put this back in the right spot each time. So here we go. I'm about to route the mortises and the legs, and they're a little trickier than the other mortises. So, because the legs sit, angled out 10 degrees, and the front of the leg is angled, 5.5 degrees from vertical, I need to hold this in my slot mortiser at those angles. So the way I've done that is when I was cutting the rear rails at that 10-degree angle, I also, while the saw was set up, I cut a wedge that was at that same angle. And then separately, I also cut another wedge that's the 5.5 degrees that's the long way as opposed to the short way, if you want to call it that. So what I've done is on the bed here, I've got one of each of these wedges taped in place that's going to hold the leg in the correct position. And then I'll use one of my 10-degree wedges at the top so I can clamp it well. I don't need to worry about the 5.5. That's small enough that I don't need another one up here for that. And then I should be good to go to route that mortise. I'm making the tenons next, the loose tenons. So I have milled material to the correct thickness that just fits nicely in my mortises and cut it to width. And I need to round over the edges. So my tenons are 5/16. So ideally I'd have a 5/32 round over bit, which I don't have. So I'm using 3/16, which is slightly bigger. I found it's better to use a slightly larger radius than required than slightly smaller. So I've got it set up here, and the bearing is flush with the fence. So I should be good to go here. On my smaller tenon, I've got a 3/16 tenon for the front lower rail. And I do the same thing. I do happen to have a 3/32 round over bit, so that will work out well for this piece. And I should also point out, in my last video, when I was pattern routing, right at the end of the video, I had a lot of shavings build up, which could have been a little dangerous if they'd gotten sucked back into the bit. And somebody pointed out that that was not a great situation. That was the first time I had done the routing with that setup, and I had forgotten to open up this opening here on my fence, which I can do by loosening some screws. And so I did that for the rest of the pattern routing. I should have shown a video of that.